When I left my small, quiet village to work for a wealthy family in the city, I thought I was chasing a fresh start. But from the moment I stepped into their sprawling mansion, something felt off. The air was heavy, the halls echoed with a silence that whispered of secrets. And Mr. Ben, my enigmatic boss, carried a coldness that chilled me to the core. At first, I chalked it up to city life, but the deeper I stepped into their world, the more I realized I wasn't just an employee. I was a witness to something dark. Shadows seemed to follow every argument, every glance, and every locked door. And then it happened, a discovery so shocking, so unthinkable, that it changed everything I thought I knew. What was Mr. Ben hiding? And why did I feel like I was caught in a trap I couldn't escape? Arrival at the mansion. The car slowed as we turned into a long driveway lined with tall, whispering trees. My breath caught when I saw it. The mansion stood like a silent giant, its towering windows reflecting the last rays of the setting sun. It was unlike anything I had ever seen. Every stone, every corner of the house seemed to scream wealth and power. Yet, beneath its grandeur, there was something else, an unsettling quiet, like the house itself was holding its breath. As we stepped out of the car, I felt small, almost insignificant. The mansion's sheer size dwarfed me, its towering gates and intricate ironwork making me feel like an uninvited guest in a world far too grand for someone like me. Amara led the way, her heels clicking against the polished stone path. "It's impressive, isn't it?" she said with a faint smile, but her voice held no warmth, as though even she wasn't entirely comfortable here. The heavy doors swung open, revealing a grand foyer that was even more overwhelming. A gleaming chandelier hung from the high ceiling, its crystals sparkling like trapped stars. The floors were polished marble, reflecting the golden glow of ornate lamps. It was breathtaking, but it wasn't welcoming. The silence wrapped around me like a cold hand, and I couldn't shake the feeling that I didn't belong. "Wait here," Amara said, disappearing through one of the many arched doorways. I stood there, clutching the strap of my bag, feeling the weight of the house pressing down on me. The air was thick, as if the walls themselves were watching. And then I saw him. Mr. Ben appeared at the top of the grand staircase, his presence filling the space like thunderclouds before a storm. He didn't move for a moment, just stood there, watching me. His gaze was piercing, cold, and unrelenting. I felt my heart quicken, my palms growing damp. He was tall, with broad shoulders and sharp features that could have belonged to a king. But it wasn't just his appearance that made my breath hitch. It was his eyes. Dark, intense, and filled with something I couldn't quite place. They seemed to strip away every layer of pretense, leaving me feeling bare and exposed. "Is this her?" he asked, his voice low and steady, like a distant rumble of thunder. Amara reappeared, smiling nervously. "Yes, this is Sandra. She'll be helping us around the house." Mr. Ben's gaze didn't waver. For a moment, I thought he might send me away, dismiss me as though I were nothing more than a speck of dust on his pristine floors. But then he nodded curtly and turned, disappearing into another room without a word. The tension lingered, and I realized I had been holding my breath. Amara touched my arm lightly. "Don't mind him," she said, her voice soft. "He's difficult, but he means well." I wanted to believe her, but something about Mr. Ben didn't feel right. His presence was magnetic, yes, but it was also deeply unsettling. He was a man of contradictions, his cold demeanor drawing me in even as it pushed me away. Amara led me upstairs, and the mansion revealed itself as a labyrinth of endless corridors and closed doors. The farther we walked, the more I felt like I was being swallowed by its silence. When she finally stopped and opened a door, I found myself in a small, tidy room with a narrow bed and a single window overlooking the expansive backyard. "This will be your room," Amara said with a forced smile. "Make yourself comfortable." I thanked her, but as I set my bag down, I couldn't help but glance toward the closed door. The mansion was beautiful, no doubt, but its silence was unnerving. And Mr. Ben? His gaze lingered in my mind, leaving a trail of questions I couldn't yet answer. That night, as I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, I heard it, the faint murmur of voices echoing through the halls. Mr. Ben and Amara, their words sharp and hurried, like two storms colliding. I couldn't make out what they were saying, but the tone was unmistakable. Anger, frustration, and something darker. The mansion's grandeur no longer felt impressive. It felt like a mask, hiding something I wasn't sure I wanted to uncover, but I had no choice. I was here now, and there was no turning back. The first shocking argument. The mansion was eerily silent that night, the kind of silence that makes every creak and shuffle echo louder than it should. I had just finished folding the last of the laundry and was about to head to my room when I heard them, raised voices breaking the stillness like glass shattering on a marble floor. Curiosity rooted me to the spot. The voices were coming from downstairs, muffled but unmistakable. It was Mr. Ben and Amara, their words sharp and tense. I knew it wasn't my place to eavesdrop, but something in their tone stopped me from walking away. I crept closer, my bare feet silent against the polished floors. Their argument became clearer with each step. "She deserves to know, Ben." Amara's voice cracked, filled with desperation and something else. Fear? Pain? I couldn't tell, but it sent a shiver down my spine. "Enough, Amara," Mr. Ben's voice replied, cold and cutting. He sounded like a man holding back a storm. "This is not the time." "But it's not fair," Amara countered, her voice rising. "You can't keep her in the dark forever. She's already—" "That's enough!" Ben's voice boomed, freezing the air around me. I pressed my back against the wall, my heart pounding like a drum. I didn't understand what they were talking about, but it was clear this wasn't an ordinary disagreement. There was a long pause, the silence thick with tension. Then Amara spoke again, her voice lower but trembling. "You think you can control everything, but this will come back to haunt you. Mark my words, Ben. She deserves to know the truth before it's too late." I leaned closer, trying to catch every word. Who was she? Were they talking about me? My stomach twisted at the thought. Ben's response was colder than I expected. "It's not your decision to make. Stay out of it, Amara." I could almost hear the ice in his words, the finality that left no room for argument. For a moment, I thought the conversation was over, but then Amara's voice broke the silence, softer this time. "You'll regret this. You always do." Her footsteps echoed as she walked away, each step heavier than the last. I barely had time to retreat before she turned the corner and disappeared into the dark hallway. My chest tightened and I exhaled slowly, trying to calm my racing heart. But I couldn't shake the feeling that I had just stumbled upon something I wasn't supposed to hear. I crept back to my room, the weight of their words pressing down on me. What was the truth Amara wanted to reveal? And why was Mr. Ben so determined to keep it hidden? As I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, their voices played on a loop in my mind. Amara's desperation, Ben's icy control. It all felt like the prelude to something much bigger, something that could unravel at any moment. The silence of the mansion felt heavier than ever that night. Every shadow seemed darker, every creak louder. It was as if the house itself was alive, holding secrets within its walls. I didn't sleep much. How could I, with so many questions swirling in my mind? The tension in this house wasn't just between Amara and Mr. Ben. It was in the air, in the walls, in every corner I had dared to explore. And now I was part of it. Whether I wanted to be or not, I was caught in their web of secrets. Whatever they were hiding, I knew one thing for certain. It was only a matter of time before the truth surfaced. And when it did, I had a feeling nothing would ever be the same. The unthinkable kiss. The mansion had a strange way of coming alive at night, its silence broken by whispers and echoes that made my heart race. I had grown used to the tension between Mr. Ben and Amara. It was like a storm brewing just beneath the surface. Their frequent arguments had become almost routine, each one laced with words that felt heavier than they should. But tonight, something felt different. I was finishing up in the kitchen, the clinking of dishes the only sound filling the air, when their voices rose again. This time, the tone was sharper, more intense. The walls seemed to tremble under the weight of their anger. I froze, my hands mid-air, straining to catch the words. "You can't keep doing this, Ben!" Amara's voice rang out, filled with frustration. "You're going to ruin everything!" "And what would you have me do, Amara?" Ben's reply was cold, his voice like a blade cutting through the tension. "This is my house, my decision. You don't get to tell me what's right or wrong." Their voices ricocheted down the hall, loud enough to make me wince, but not enough to reveal their secrets. I hesitated for a moment, but curiosity got the better of me. I dried my hands and tiptoed toward the living room, keeping to the shadows. Peeking around the corner, I saw them standing in the center of the room. Amara's back was turned to me, but I could see her trembling. Ben loomed over her, his posture rigid, his jaw clenched. "Don't you care about anyone but yourself?" Amara's voice cracked, her pain evident. "You think this is just about you? About your pride?" Ben's expression was unreadable, his piercing gaze locked on hers. "You have no idea what I've sacrificed," he said, his tone lower now but still heavy with emotion. The air between them was charged, like the moment before lightning strikes. I watched, holding my breath, as Amara stepped closer, her voice softening. "You don't have to do this alone, Ben. You never did." For a moment, neither of them moved. The tension was suffocating, and I felt my heartbeat in my throat. Then, out of nowhere, it happened. Amara reached for him, and before I could fully process what I was seeing, Ben pulled her into a kiss. It wasn't just any kiss. It was passionate, intense, the kind of kiss that left no room for doubt about the feelings behind it. My eyes widened in shock. My legs felt like they were glued to the floor. My mind raced with questions I couldn't answer. Why were they kissing? Were they lovers? Siblings? The idea of either left me unsettled, my thoughts spiraling into places I didn't want them to go. The kiss didn't last long, but it was long enough to change everything. When they pulled apart, Amara's face was flushed, and Ben's expression softened in a way I had never seen before. He cupped her face, his thumb brushing her cheek, and whispered something I couldn't hear. I stepped back, my heart pounding in my chest. I didn't want to see more. I didn't want to hear more. Whatever was happening between them felt like a secret too big for me to handle. I hurried back to the kitchen, my mind a whirlwind of emotions. The image of them together replayed in my head, each detail more vivid than the last. The kiss had changed everything I thought I knew about them. For the first time since I arrived, I felt truly afraid. Not of the mansion or the silence or even Mr. Ben's cold demeanor. I was afraid of the secrets I was uncovering and what they might mean for me. Because now I wasn't just a bystander. I was part of their tangled web, and I couldn't escape it. The mysterious photograph. The morning sun filtered through the mansion's grand windows, casting long beams of light on the polished floors. It was a rare, quiet day, with Amara busy in town and Mr. Ben locked away in his study. The silence, though unsettling at first, had become a comfort. It gave me time to think and explore. As I dusted shelves in the living room, my gaze wandered to a wooden cabinet tucked into the corner. Its dark finish gleamed, and the brass handle begged for attention. It was nothing unusual, but something about it pulled me closer. I hesitated, glancing around the empty room. Amara had never explicitly told me not to touch anything, but Mr. Ben's looming presence often felt like an unspoken rule. Don't pry. But the curiosity bubbling inside me was stronger than caution. I pulled the handle gently, and the cabinet door creaked open. Inside, a collection of papers, trinkets, and neatly stacked books lay undisturbed. My fingers brushed over the edges until they stopped on a corner of glossy paper, an old photograph. I slid it out carefully, my heart quickening as I turned it over. The photo was slightly faded, but the image was clear. It was Amara, years younger, holding a small child no older than 2. Her smile was radiant, her arms wrapped protectively around the boy. But there was something haunting about the picture. The joy in her expression felt forced, like a mask hiding something deeper. On the back of the photo, a date was scrawled in bold, looping handwriting, April 17th, 20XX. My brows furrowed. The date wasn't recent, and the faint smudge of ink suggested it had been written hastily, almost carelessly. I stared at the photograph, questions flooding my mind. Who was the child? He didn't look like Mr. Ben, but there was something familiar in the shape of his eyes. And why had Amara never mentioned him? My chest tightened. Could this be the secret they were arguing about? I tucked the photograph back into the cabinet, my hands trembling slightly. The air in the room felt heavier now, as if the walls were aware of what I had found. For the rest of the morning, I couldn't focus. My thoughts were tangled, each question leading to another. The child in the photo seemed to follow me, his innocent face etched into my mind. By the time Amara returned, her usual confident stride felt different, quieter, more reserved. I watched her from across the room, the photograph burning like a hidden flame in my pocket. I wanted to confront her, to demand answers, but the tension between her and Mr. Ben was always a barrier. Later that evening, as I passed by the study, I heard muffled voices. Mr. Ben and Amara were talking again, but this time their tones were hushed, almost conspiratorial. I leaned against the doorframe, straining to hear. "She's been here long enough, Ben," Amara said, her voice tense. "It's only a matter of time before she starts asking questions." "She won't," Mr. Ben replied, his tone colder than ever. "And if she does, we'll deal with it. You know what's at stake." My stomach churned. Were they talking about me? My pulse raced as I hurried back to my room, locking the door behind me. That night, the photograph haunted my dreams. The child's face seemed to merge with the mansion's shadows, his small eyes filled with secrets I wasn't sure I wanted to uncover. Whatever Amara and Mr. Ben were hiding, it was bigger than I had imagined, and somehow I was becoming part of it. For the first time since I arrived, I felt like I wasn't just working for them. I was being watched, measured, and perhaps even tested, and I had no idea what they would do if they found out what I had seen. The climax. The storm that had been brewing in the mansion finally broke one evening. The air was heavy with tension, and even the walls seemed to hold their breath. I had just finished setting the dining table when I heard it, a crash so loud it made me flinch. A vase had shattered, and Amara's voice rang out, sharp and trembling. "I can't do this anymore, Ben!" she shouted, her voice breaking in a way I had never heard before. I stood frozen in the hallway, clutching a napkin, unsure whether to walk away or stay and listen. The argument was louder than usual, filled with something deeper than anger. Pain. "You think this is easy for me?" Ben's voice roared back, filled with an emotion I couldn't place. "You don't understand?" "I understand perfectly," Amara interrupted, her voice shaking. "I gave up everything for you, my life, my happiness, even my son." Her words hit me like a wave. I pressed myself against the wall, my heart pounding. Her son? My mind raced back to the photograph. The boy, her radiant smile masking something painful. Was this what she had been hiding all along? Ben's voice softened, but it was no less intense. "You think I didn't sacrifice? You think I don't carry the weight of what our family did to us? I'm trying to keep us from falling apart again, Amara." A heavy silence followed, broken only by the sound of Amara sobbing. I dared to peek around the corner, my breath caught in my throat. Amara was on the floor, her knees pulled to her chest, her face buried in her hands. "I can't pretend any more," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "She deserves to know the truth." If you won't tell her, I will. Ben stood across from her, his shoulders slumped, the usual sharpness in his features softened by something that looked like guilt. He didn't argue this time. She's not just some stranger working for us, Amara said, lifting her tear-streaked face. Her eyes locked onto Ben's, and for a moment the pain between them was palpable. She's a part of this now. She deserves to know who we are. Ben didn't respond, but his silence felt like permission. Amara took a deep breath, wiping her face as she stood. Her gaze turned toward me, and I realized too late that she knew I was there. "Come out, Sandra," she said, her voice trembling but steady. "It's time you knew." I stepped into the room, my hands shaking. Amara looked at me with a mix of exhaustion and resolve. Ben, on the other hand, turned away, his jaw tight as he stared at the shattered vase. Amara gestured to the couch, and I sat, my heart pounding in my chest. She sat across from me, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. "I'm not just Mr. Ben's employee," she began, her voice calm but heavy with emotion. "I'm his sister. We grew up in a family that, let's just say, it wasn't kind to us." I glanced at Ben, who remained silent, his back still turned. Amara continued, her words spilling out like a confession. "The boy in the photograph you found, that's my son. I had him when I was very young, but I had to leave him behind to help Ben. Our family was falling apart, and he needed me. There wasn't room for both." Tears welled in her eyes, and her voice cracked. I told myself it was the right thing to do, but every day I wonder if I made the wrong choice. I abandoned my child to save my brother, and it broke me. The room felt colder as her words sank in. My gaze shifted to Ben, who finally turned around, his face etched with a sorrow I hadn't seen before. "Ben hides behind his cold demeanor because it's the only way he knows how to survive," Amara said, her voice softer now. "He's spent his whole life trying to protect what little we have left, but it's cost him everything, his happiness, his peace." Ben's eyes met mine for the first time, and they were no longer piercing or cold. They were filled with pain. "This house, it's all I have left," he said quietly. "And now you know why we are the way we are." I sat there, unable to speak, the weight of their story pressing down on me. Their secrets were no longer hidden, but the scars they carried were undeniable. For the first time, I saw them not as my employers, but as broken people trying to piece their lives back together. And somehow, I was now a part of it. The final twist. The days that followed Amara's confession were quieter, but the silence felt different now. It wasn't the cold, oppressive stillness that had first greeted me in the mansion. Instead, it carried the weight of unspoken truths and lingering pain. I thought I finally understood them. Amara's sacrifice, Ben's guarded nature, and the invisible scars that bound them to this house. I wanted to believe that the worst was behind us, that the secrets had been laid bare. But I was wrong. One evening, as I was tidying the living room, I heard footsteps behind me. Turning, I saw Ben standing in the doorway, his hands in his pockets, his expression unreadable. His presence filled the room, as it always did, but there was something different about him tonight. "Sandra," he said, his voice softer than usual. "I need to tell you something." I straightened, the weight in his tone sending a chill through me. "What is it?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. He walked over to the large window, his gaze fixed on the sprawling garden outside. For a moment, I thought he wouldn't speak. Then, with a deep breath, he began. "You've seen the cracks in this family," he said, his voice low but steady. "You know about Amara's son, about what we've lost, but there's more, something I've been trying to handle on my own." My stomach tightened as I listened. What more could there be? "A few months ago, before you came here, someone tried to take everything from me," he continued, his jaw tightening. "This house, the company, everything I've built to keep us afloat. It was all nearly destroyed." I stepped closer, my heart racing. "What happened?" He turned to face me, his eyes darker than I had ever seen them. "It was someone I trusted," he said, his voice trembling slightly. A man who worked for me for years. He betrayed me, stole from me, and tried to sell our family's secrets to people who would have torn us apart. I swallowed hard, my mind racing to make sense of his words. Did you stop him? Ben nodded, but there was no relief in his expression. I did, but it came at a cost. I had to make deals, call in favors, and cut ties with people I thought I could rely on. It left us vulnerable, more vulnerable than I can let Amara know. I felt a pang of sympathy for him. His icy demeanor, his distant behavior. It all made sense now. He wasn't just protecting himself. He was protecting the fragile remains of his family. But there's more, he said, his voice dropping lower. The man I stopped. He isn't gone. He's been threatening me ever since, trying to find new ways to hurt us, and I don't know how much longer I can keep him at bay. The weight of his confession hit me like a tidal wave. This wasn't just about the past. It was about the present, the future. The danger wasn't over. It was lurking, waiting for its chance to strike. What does he want? I asked, my voice shaking. Ben's gaze hardened. Revenge, and he'll do anything to get it. A chill ran down my spine. The mansion, once a symbol of power and control, now felt like a fortress under siege. The walls that had once seemed so strong now felt fragile, as if they could crumble under the weight of these secrets. Why are you telling me this? I asked, my voice barely steady. Ben took a step closer, his eyes locked on mine. Because you're part of this now. Whether you realize it or not, you're in the middle of all of this. And I need to know if I can trust you. I felt the air leave my lungs. Trust? After everything I had seen and heard, the idea of trust felt almost laughable. But as I looked into his eyes, I saw something I hadn't seen before. A flicker of vulnerability, of hope. I don't know what's going to happen next, he said, his voice barely above a whisper. But I need you to stay. For Amara, for this house, and for me. The room seemed to shrink around us, the gravity of his words pulling me deeper into their world. I nodded slowly, unable to find the words to respond. Because even though I didn't know what lay ahead, I knew one thing for certain. The secrets of this house were far from over, and the real storm was only just beginning. As the dust settled, I thought I had uncovered every secret buried within the mansion's cold walls. But secrets, like shadows, never truly vanish. They linger, waiting for the perfect moment to resurface. Even as life returned to a fragile normalcy, I couldn't shake the feeling that something, or someone, was still missing from the picture. What other truths could be hidden in a house built on lies? Sometimes the most dangerous mysteries aren't the ones you uncover. They're the ones that remain hidden. Remember, betrayal, love, and redemption have a way of colliding when you least expect it. Stay tuned for more tales where the lines between truth and deception blur, and every revelation changes everything. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for stories that will keep you on the edge of your seat. The next twist is just around the corner.